Hello. You ever wake up one day and realize your whole life has been a lie? Yeah, that was me, except instead of just crying into a pint of ice cream, I turned my heartbreak into something spectacular. Some people get therapy. I got even. And let's just say, my wife's name is now synonymous with artistic infidelity, literally. Let me rewind a bit. My name's Jake, and up until a few months ago, I thought I was living the dream. Great job, a wife I adored, a solid circle of friends. I was one of those guys who genuinely believed I had it all figured out. I worked as a graphic designer, freelancing for big companies, while my wife, Rachel, had a stable corporate job. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. Our biggest problem was deciding where to go on vacation, and honestly, I thought that was a good problem to have. Rachel was everything I ever wanted in a partner: smart, funny, beautiful, and just the right amount of weird. She was also ambitious, always chasing the next promotion, the next big project. I admired that about her. I thought we were a team. Turns out, she had been playing for a different team behind my back. The signs were there, of course. The late nights at work, the sudden obsession with her appearance, the vague, half-hearted excuses. But love makes you stupid, and I was too busy trusting her to connect the dots. Until, of course, the universe decided to slap me across the face with the truth. One evening, I was working late in my home office when her laptop chimed with a message. She had left it open on the kitchen counter, and normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. But something about the way the preview flashed, something about the words, "I can't stop thinking about last night," made my stomach drop. I wasn't the kind of guy who snoops, but that night, I became one. What I found made my blood run cold. Not just a few messages, but an entire novel of deceit. Photos, texts, even calendar invites. Turns out, Rachel and her colleague had been enjoying company retreats that I had no idea existed. I sat there for a while, just staring at the screen, feeling like my entire world had been yanked out from under me. But then, something clicked. The anger didn't come all at once. It seeped in, slow and deliberate, filling every corner of my mind. And that's when I knew. Crying wouldn't fix this. Begging wouldn't change it. But you know what might? Making sure she never forgot the day she crossed me. This wasn't going to be a standard divorce. This was going to be a masterpiece. You ever have one of those moments where everything in your life suddenly makes sense, except in the worst possible way? That was me, sitting there in my dimly lit home office, staring at my wife's laptop, realizing that I was the last person to know my own marriage had expired. I didn't react right away. There was no dramatic scene, no immediate confrontation. Just silence. The kind that presses down on you like a weight, making it hard to breathe. I sat there for what felt like hours, scrolling through months of messages, piecing together the timeline of my own humiliation. Turns out, Rachel wasn't just having an affair, she was thriving in it. The messages weren't just lusty whispers of betrayal, they were confessions of excitement. She enjoyed sneaking around. She loved the thrill of deceiving me. She told this guy things she never said to me, shared inside jokes I wasn't part of, and worst of all, she made me the punchline. And who was the lucky winner of my wife's divided attention? Some guy named Ethan, a so-called creative director at her firm. I looked him up. One of those insufferable types who wears beanies indoors, calls everything a vibe, and probably orders oat milk lattes with a straight face. A walking, talking cliché of every pretentious, self-proclaimed visionary who thinks they reinvented art by making a blurry black and white video of a pigeon. This was the guy she was willing to risk everything for? Unbelievable. But the more I read, the more I started seeing things clearly. The little things suddenly felt like everything. Like how Rachel had been so enthusiastic about this year's company retreat, more than ever before. She even insisted I stay home since it would be boring for me. Right. Boring. I bet. Or how she suddenly became obsessed with late-night, creative meetings, claiming that deadlines were tight, yet every morning she still woke up glowing, refreshed, and suspiciously fulfilled. Or the fact that she hadn't initiated anything intimate with me in months, but apparently, she had plenty of energy for Ethan. I even found pictures. Nothing too explicit, thank God, because I'm not sure I would have recovered from that, but enough to paint a crystal clear picture. Photos of them at bars, in hotel lobbies, in places she told me she was too busy to go. There was even a picture of her wearing a dress I had bought her for our anniversary, except she had worn it for him. That one stung. And yet, I didn't explode. Didn't flip the table, didn't punch a hole in the wall. I sat there, letting the rage simmer, letting it settle into something useful. I wasn't just going to leave. I wasn't going to scream or beg for explanations I didn't need. I was going to ruin her. Not physically, not violently, but in a way she'd never see coming. Rachel loved attention. She lived for validation. The perfect social butterfly, always curating the perfect image, online and in real life. She thrived on admiration, on being seen as the woman who had it all. And now? Now she was about to become the centerpiece of something much, much bigger. I closed her laptop, took a deep breath, and I started planning. The moment I closed that laptop, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about art. Rachel always prided herself on her image. Every aspect of her life was curated, carefully presented like an Instagram feed come to life. She was the woman everyone envied, the polished corporate go-getter, the effortlessly charming socialite, the woman who had it all. And the thing about people who need admiration? They can't handle humiliation. I wasn't going to expose her in some petty way. No yelling, no public screaming match, no sad divorce papers slipped across a kitchen table. No, if I was going to do this, I was going to do it in a way that mattered. In a way that made it impossible for her to walk away unscathed. I needed to build something bigger than her affair. Something so undeniable, so visceral, that even if she tried to spin the narrative, she'd fail spectacularly. And I knew exactly how. I stayed quiet for days, letting the truth marinate, while Rachel went about her life like nothing had changed. She still kissed me goodbye in the morning, still texted me love you before bed. And the whole time, I watched her, studying her, noting every single crack in the performance she thought was flawless. At night, I worked. I collected. I created. Because here's the thing. I wasn't just some average guy who stumbled upon his wife's affair. I was a designer, an artist in my own right. I had spent years crafting visuals that could move people, manipulate emotions, sell billion-dollar products with just the right shade of color and a well-placed font. And now, for the first time, I had a real reason to create. I started with the messages. The ones I found on her laptop were just the beginning. I dug deeper, found backups she forgot existed, scrolled through timestamps to create a perfectly documented timeline of her betrayal. But I didn't stop there. Screenshots were too easy, too basic. I turned them into art. Each message, each damning piece of evidence, became a poster. Bold, striking, beautifully designed, like something you'd see in an art museum or a high-end advertising campaign. The text messages weren't just copied and pasted. They were transformed into haunting pieces of visual storytelling. One poster featured a black-and-white photo of Rachel and Ethan in a hotel bar, with her own words layered over the top. I can't stop thinking about last night. Another had a minimalist layout, just one simple text bubble on a white background. I love you. He has no idea. I experimented with typography, colors, layout, every detail meticulously crafted, ensuring each piece felt like a statement. And when I was done, I had an entire gallery of my wife's infidelity. But I wasn't just making these for myself. I had plans for them. Because Rachel's world revolved around exposure, events, networking parties, high-end galas where people drank overpriced cocktails and complimented each other's fake success. And the biggest one of them all, the annual Creative Industry Gala, a prestigious event where artists, designers, and media executives gathered to showcase the latest in visual storytelling. Rachel had spent months securing an invite. It was the perfect setting, so I made sure my work got featured. Through a few connections, I managed to submit my project under an anonymous pseudonym. No names, no personal details, just the art itself. The selection committee loved it, called it raw, powerful, a brilliant commentary on modern relationships. They had no idea it wasn't commentary. It was real. And just like that, my wife's affair was about to become the centerpiece of the biggest creative event of the year. She had no idea. There's a special kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing something no one else does, from walking into a room filled with unsuspecting people, shaking hands, making small talk, all while sitting on a secret so explosive that the very air around you feels electric. I was living in that moment. I was standing in the grand hall of the Creative Industry Gala, a glass of bourbon in my hand, surrounded by some of the biggest names in design, marketing, and media. My wife, Rachel, was somewhere across the room, blissfully unaware that the walls were closing in on her. She looked stunning. She always did at events like this, draped in a designer dress, flashing that perfect, practiced smile, playing the role of the sophisticated corporate queen. She moved through the crowd with effortless grace, engaging in empty, pretentious conversations with industry elites who didn't care about her words, only about the status she represented. And Ethan? That smug, oat milk drinking excuse for a man? He was here too, lurking in the shadows like a parasite, probably thinking he was the secret puppet master pulling the strings. I took a slow sip of my drink, feeling the burn of the alcohol mix with the fire in my chest. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they were clever. They had no idea that in just a few minutes, their affair would become art history. The gallery was set up beautifully, dimly lit with spotlights highlighting each featured project. This wasn't some cheap, rushed expose. This was a presentation, a statement crafted with the same meticulous care that Rachel had used to build her perfect little double life. The first poster hung at the entrance, a bold piece with a deep red background. The words, "I can't stop thinking about last night," printed in stark white typography. Simple. Elegant. A whisper of things to come. The further you walked in, the more personal it became. A grayscale image of a hotel keycard. "You should have stayed home tonight." A close-up of intertwined fingers, just barely out of focus. "What he doesn't know won't kill him." A bold, minimalist poster, just a timestamp, 11:47 p.m., and the name Ethan Redhart in a phone notification bubble. By the time the guests reached the centerpiece, the whispers had turned into murmurs, and the murmurs into hushed, stunned silence. People were beginning to understand. The final piece stood taller than the rest, a haunting black and white portrait of Rachel taken from her own company's website. Overlaid across her face were her own words in a perfectly spaced, magazine cover font. "I love you." He has no idea. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched from a distance as the realization hit Rachel like a freight train. Her expression, once confident and poised, cracked like glass under a hammer. She turned toward the display, her eyes scanning the pieces, her breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps as she recognized herself in every frame, every phrase, every brutal, undeniable truth hanging on those walls. She wasn't just exposed. She was immortalized. People were staring now, some whispering, some pulling out their phones to snap photos, to capture the moment her carefully constructed life fell apart in real time. Ethan, that idiot, was frozen in place, his face draining of color as he read his own name printed in bold, elegant design. He looked around like a trapped animal, probably realizing there was no clever way out of this, no smooth excuse that could undo what was already seen, already felt by everyone in the room. Rachel's hands were trembling. I could see her trying to piece together an explanation, trying to figure out how to spin this, but there was no escape. She was the subject now, the artwork, the muse of her own downfall. She turned suddenly, scanning the crowd, desperate to find me. And when our eyes finally met from across the room, I lifted my glass. And I smiled. You can always tell when someone is about to lose everything. It's in the way their body tenses, the way their eyes dart around, desperate for an escape that isn't there. Rachel was trapped. The moment her perfect world shattered, she did what every cornered liar does, she panicked. Her breaths were shallow, her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no words came out. The room wasn't just silent anymore, it was charged, like the air before a storm. Every set of eyes in that gallery was on her, watching, waiting, savoring the moment. The whispers turned into full conversations, hushed but urgent, as guests pieced together the truth that had been hanging on the walls in bold, beautiful typography. I didn't move. I didn't have to. The destruction was unfolding exactly as I had planned. Rachel's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her nails pressing into her palms as she turned wildly, searching for someone, anyone, to make this nightmare stop. And then, her gaze locked onto mine. She stormed toward me, her heels clicking against the polished floor, eyes burning with fury, fear, and something else, humiliation. "You did this." Her voice was a hiss, sharp, barely controlled. I tilted my head slightly, as if considering it. Then I took a slow sip of my drink before answering. Who else would have such impeccable design skills? Rachel's face twisted. She wasn't used to being powerless. She had spent our entire marriage mastering the art of control over me, over how people saw her, over the perfect life she thought she was building. But this was out of her hands. "You're insane, Jake. This is defamation. You have no right." I laughed. Actually laughed, because this was the moment I had been waiting for. The switch. The part where she went from panic to defensive, from victim to aggressor. Like clockwork. "Defamation?" I repeated, feigning surprise. "Rachel, sweetheart, these are literally your words. I didn't write them. I just presented them in a way people could appreciate. You should be flattered. Your lies have finally been recognized as art. A few people in the crowd chuckled. Someone even whispered, he's got a point. Rachel's breath hitched, her face flushing a deep, humiliated red. And then, Ethan. He had been standing off to the side, frozen, probably realizing that his oat milk latte aesthetic wasn't going to save him tonight. But when he saw Rachel unraveling, he must have figured he had to do something. So he stepped forward. Dude, this is low. His voice was forced, trying to sound calm, above it all. You're really going to ruin her reputation over a personal issue? I turned to him slowly, taking my time, watching as he fidgeted under my gaze. A personal issue? I repeated, mockingly. That's rich, coming from the guy who was personally involved in wrecking my marriage. His jaw tightened. Rachel turned toward him, her panic shifting. Was he really going to speak for her? Defend her? Was he worth it? This isn't the place for this, Ethan muttered, running a hand through his hair, already calculating his exit strategy. Let's talk about this like adults. I smirked. Oh, now you want to be adults? Because last I checked, adults don't sneak around behind their partners' backs. Adults don't tell each other he has no idea, while laughing about it in a hotel bar. Rachel's eyes widened slightly. She realized something just then. I hadn't just made a couple of posters. I had everything. Screenshots, photos, dates. She had underestimated me completely. Ethan turned to her now, his expression changing. You told him that. Rachel froze. For the first time, she wasn't in control of the conversation. Ethan, you said I was the one overthinking things, that you weren't worried about this getting out. That it wasn't serious. His voice rose, no longer trying to be cool. You swore no one would find out. Rachel reached for his arm. No, Rachel. I stuck my neck out for you. You said you had this under control. I almost felt bad for the guy. Almost. Rachel turned back to me. You can't come back from this, Jake. I smiled. Neither can you. And then, I took out my phone, held it up, and clicked post. The story, the artwork, all of it, already prepared. A curated masterpiece, neatly packaged, a social media detonation waiting to happen. Rachel's eyes widened in horror. A second later, her phone buzzed. Then Ethan's. Then a dozen other people around the room. The viral storm had begun, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The moment the first notification pinged, I knew it was over. Rachel's phone vibrated again and again, her hands gripping it so tight her knuckles turned white. Ethan's jaw tensed as his screen lit up with chaos, his face shifting from disbelief to something close to sheer horror. And around them, the guests, the industry elites, the influencers, the executives, they were no longer whispering. They were watching. Rachel had spent years crafting her image, perfecting her brand, making sure she was always in control of how the world saw her. Now she was watching that image disintegrate in real time. Because I hadn't just posted the story. I had made sure it went everywhere. I had timed it perfectly, scheduled it to hit every major social platform simultaneously. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn. Oh yeah, I wasn't just going for petty gossip. I was going for professional ruination. The post included screenshots, artwork, timestamps, a meticulously designed expose showcasing not just the affair, but the duplicity, the manipulation, the utter lack of remorse. Rachel wasn't just a cheater. She was a fraud. And now everyone knew it. Her breath hitched, her fingers flying over her phone screen, probably scrambling to delete things, to shut it down, but it was too late. The internet doesn't forget, and it sure as hell doesn't forgive. Jake, stop this. Now. Rachel's voice trembled, but I didn't miss the venom beneath it. Even now, in the wreckage of her empire, she was still trying to command the situation, to control me. I took a slow sip of my bourbon, letting the silence hang between us before I answered. You don't get to tell me what to do anymore. Her mouth opened, ready to retaliate. But then, the real storm began. Phones buzzed uncontrollably. People weren't just reading the post anymore. They were reacting. The comments, the tagging, the resharing. Holy crap, have you guys seen this? This is straight out of a movie. Rachel? The same Rachel who preaches about loyalty and ethics in business? This Rachel. How do we know this is real? Bro, there's like 100 screenshots. She's done. Her career is over. Rachel's eyes darted across the room, scanning the faces of her colleagues, her friends, Even her superiors, people who, just minutes ago, were sipping cocktails and exchanging fake pleasantries. Now? Now they were watching her like a crime scene. Ethan looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. The smug confidence he had when he tried to defend her? Gone. He knew. They both knew. This wasn't just a scandal. This was career-ending, life-altering, social suicide. Rachel's phone rang. She flinched, staring at the screen like it was a ticking time bomb. I already knew who it was. Her boss. Because as much as Rachel loved public admiration, she loved corporate approval even more. And now? Now her entire reputation, her trust, her credibility was in the toilet. She turned away from me, hands shaking, moving toward the exit like she could somehow outrun the disaster unfolding in real time. But then, a voice cut through the noise. So, are we going to talk about how she's still wearing her wedding ring? The room erupted. Some people laughed. Others gasped. But it was loud, and Rachel froze mid-step. Because they were right. She was still wearing my ring. My ring on her finger, in this moment, as she stood fully exposed as a liar, a cheater, a fraud. It was pathetic. And so, in front of everyone, I walked toward her. Slowly. Deliberately. Watching as she stiffened, her breath uneven, her pulse visible in her neck. I reached out, calmly, effortlessly, took her left hand in mine, and slid the ring off her finger. Held it up. Looked at it. Then, I dropped it. It hit the floor with a small, final clink. And just like that, I walked away. I left her standing in the wreckage of everything she had built. I left Ethan scrambling to distance himself, already knowing his career was taking a direct hit too. I left the whispers, the chaos, the destruction, because I didn't need to watch it unfold anymore. I had already won. And as I stepped out into the cold night air, the distant echo of Rachel's world collapsing behind me, I took a deep breath and smiled. Because this was my masterpiece. They say karma isn't real. That bad people don't always get what they deserve. I'd like to introduce you to Exhibit A, Rachel. 6 months have passed since the creative industry gala massacre, as the internet lovingly dubbed it, and let's just say, she hasn't exactly landed on her feet. The once unstoppable, untouchable Rachel, the woman who built a career on image, networking, and manipulation, was now nothing more than a disgraced afterthought in an industry that moves on fast. It all unraveled quicker than even I expected. Her company wasted no time in cutting ties. She was fired within a week. Not because she cheated, corporate execs barely blink at that. No, she was fired because she became a liability. She wasn't just exposed personally, she was exposed professionally. Clients pulled deals. Her team lost faith in her. Her reputation became a PR disaster. She tried to play the victim at first, sobbing about a smear campaign and digital harassment. But it's hard to claim you're being defamed when your own words are printed in museum-quality posters for the whole world to see. By the end of the month, she was blacklisted from nearly every major company in her field. No one wanted to hire her. No one wanted the baggage. And Ethan? Oh, Ethan. Turns out, he was just as spineless as I thought. The moment things got messy, he did what any self-absorbed, oat-milk-drinking creative visionary would do. He bailed. Left her completely. No grand gesture. No standing by her side. Just a quiet, convenient disappearance. Because that's the thing about affairs, they aren't built to last. And Rachel? Well, Rachel was alone. I checked in on her a few times, not directly, of course. I'm not a psychopath. But you'd be amazed what you can piece together from social media and a few well-placed connections. The last I heard, she had downsized, moved into a much smaller apartment, far away from the luxury loft she once bragged about. No fancy business trips. No lavish brunches. Just silence. Her friend group? Gone. The people she used to call her inner circle had all distanced themselves. No one wanted to be associated with a walking scandal. She tried freelancing for a while, but, well, good luck convincing clients to trust someone whose biggest contribution to the art world was getting publicly eviscerated. The funniest part? She actually reached out to me. An email. Just one. A pathetic, hollow attempt at closure. Some nonsense about how I must feel so proud of myself, how she hopes I can move on from my bitterness, and how she's working on healing. Healing? Healing from what? From getting caught? From losing everything she willingly threw away? I didn't respond. She didn't deserve one. Because the truth is, I did move on. My career? Booming. Turns out, when your work goes viral in the most spectacular way possible, you attract the right kind of attention. I took on new clients. Bigger clients. Started working with agencies that actually respect loyalty and talent. I was thriving. Rachel was surviving. And that was enough for me. They say revenge doesn't fix anything, that it doesn't bring closure. Maybe that's true for some people. But for me, watching Rachel fade into irrelevance was the most satisfying masterpiece I could have ever created. Bye-bye.